Hello, friends, and welcome back to another week of Unsolved Ramblings with me, your host, Danielle. Here I will ramble and speculate about unsolved cases in hopes of shedding light so that these families can stop waiting for answers and finally have some closure. Every family deserves to know what happened to their loved one. Join me each week for new cases, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Before we dive right in, I'd like to state that I am not an expert and that this is for entertainment purposes. All my information comes from research of what has been published online. All online sources are linked in the description of this video. A mother and her son are missing. We will ramble on about Susan Susie Osborne and her son Evan Chartrand. They both have been missing since May 29th of 2017 from Holtville, Alabama. That was the last time Susie's best friend Holly spoke with Susie through text messages. But on the 30th, when Holly tried to contact Susie, Holly got no answer. Okay, guys, this case is very baffling and kind of confusing. There was a lot of information I found in this case, but you must ask yourself, how do two people go missing on the exact same day at the exact same time, and they just disappear, they vanish into thin air, and they're gone with no explanation to anyone? It seems very unlikely that this is what happened to Susie and her son Evan, but let's go over the evidence and you can decide for yourself. At the time of their disappearance, Susan was described as a 42-year-old Caucasian female with blonde hair, blue eyes, standing at 5'3", weighing at 120 pounds. Evan was described as a 15-year-old Caucasian male with brown hair, blue eyes, standing at 5'7", weighing at about 160 pounds. Our story actually begins in 2005. Now, this is when Susie and Evan's father are living in Michigan. Now, sources state that their relationship was pretty rocky, very tumultuous, constantly fighting. Evan's father's job decides to transfer them to Alabama. Well, even though all those problems were going on in the relationship, Susie decided to move with Evan's father to Alabama in an attempt to make the marriage work. Once they moved, they both realized that it was not working, and it was not long before the pair divorced. But Susie and Evan, they remained in Alabama despite all Susie's family living out of state. Once the pair divorced, Susie and Evan moved to Prattville, Alabama. And it's in 2009 when Susie meets her best friend Holly Morris when Holly moves in across the street from Susie. They quickly became close friends. They would talk, text, and spend a lot of time together, go shopping, go on vacations, have backyard barbecues. By the time Holly had come into Susie's life, Susie had divorced Evan's father, remarried, had a beautiful baby girl, and divorced for the second time. Despite her trouble in her love life, Susie was a devoted mother. Even though her daughter's father had custody of her, Susie would have very regular visits and even would speak to her on the phone every single day. There was really not a lot of information as to why the daughter did not live with Susie, but Evan and his mother were very close. They were both very outgoing, known as jokesters, always cutting up and laughing, making jokes with each other. One of the other things that Evan and Susie loved to do was go fishing. Evan was an avid fisherman. Susie had taught Evan to fish when he was just a little boy, and he loved it. He even made his own lures. It would be on an afternoon in 2013, after a day out fishing with Evan, that Susie called her best friend Holly to report that Susie had met someone. Now, this was out of the norm for Susie because since her second divorce, which had ended badly, Susie hadn't dated anyone really. She was focused on her children. But Susie had met Jerry Osborne, an Air Force veteran. He had been medically released from the military, but still worked on a military base as a 911 dispatch operator. Sources state that compared to Susie's last marriage, Jerry was like a fresh breeze blowing into their lives. Holly, Susie's best friend, states that it would seem Susie was head over heels for Jerry from the beginning. Jerry and Susie would not date for very long when Susie called Holly And on the caller ID on Holly's phone, it came up to Susan Osborne. Holly questioned Susie about the change in the last name, and that's the first time Holly learned that Susie had married Jerry in January of 2014. So less than a year after they met. And Susie did not tell anybody that she was planning on marrying Jerry. None of the people in her circle knew. Even Susie's own mother was unaware that Susie had even met Jerry until after investigating on her own and found the marriage license on the internet, listed in a local newspaper. Her own mother didn't know that she was getting married. Her mother stated in interviews that Susie was a private person, and when she asked Susie why she hadn't told anyone, Susie replied, "Well, I wanted to make sure it was going to work before announcing it to the world." After they married, the couple purchased a home in Holtville, Alabama, and all three moved into the home. Susie quit her job to devote her time to being a wonderful wife and mother. Susie adored her children. Sources state that even though Susie didn't have custody of her daughter, Susie's life was centered around her kids. The few people that had met Jerry said Jerry displayed behavior that could be read in two different ways. On the one hand, he could be perceived as a wonderful father figure, a protective, loving, and doting husband, always wanting Susan to look her best, didn't mind spending money on her. On the other hand, he could be perceived as controlling. He always had to be right next to her. Wherever she would go, he would go. He would go through her phone, read her text messages. But Susie insisted everything was like a fairy tale. For 3 years, nothing out of the ordinary seemed to go wrong for Jerry and Susie. And Susie's close circle of friends and family state that they were happy for Susie. Happy that she had finally found someone who seemed like he wanted to take care of her and Evan. Right before Memorial Day in 2017, Holly, Susie's best friend, moves to Florida with her fiancé. Holly states that even though she moved to Florida, they remained close friends and spoke either over the phone or through text messaging every single day. May 28, 2017 was the last day Holly states that she spoke to Susie over the phone. And she says there were no hints of anything being out of the ordinary, just a casual conversation between two friends. On May 29, 2017, Susie and Holly texted back and forth a few times because it was Memorial Day. But on the 30th, when Holly texted Susie to say good morning, Holly never got an answer back. In the beginning, Holly just thought maybe Susie was mad at her because she'd moved away, that maybe Susie needed some space. Holly didn't want to push her friend if she was upset. But as the weeks went by and there was still no answer from Susie, Holly just knew something was wrong. And in the meantime, Susie's mother, who lived in Texas, had just visited Susie on Mother's Day in Susie's home in Holtville, Alabama. And she states that they had a lovely visit. She was happy that Susie had found someone to provide for her and Evan. She never thought that that would be the last time she would ever get to see her daughter and her grandson's face. Susie's mother had also been trying to contact Susie and Evan during those few weeks after Memorial Day. She was never able to reach them. So Susie's mom calls Holly and asks if Holly has spoken to her. And that is when the two discover that Susie and Evan have not been heard from by anyone since Memorial Day, and that their phones had been disconnected. Susie's mother decides, well, I'll write her a letter. Things happen to the phone all the time. Maybe they just hadn't had a chance to get new ones yet. But when the letter is returned saying it was undeliverable, and Susie's family doesn't know Jerry very well or how to contact him, and believed that if something had happened, Jerry would call, but he never did. So Susie's family and friends start to worry. At this point, 2 months have gone by, and still no contact from Susie or Evan. She would not go more than 2 days without talking to her daughter. So on July 29, 2017, that's when they finally decide to file a missing persons report. And they ask the police to go and perform a welfare check on Susie and Evan. 2 months have gone by. People don't just vanish into thin air. Some people do leave bad situations and, go start a new life somewhere, but the odds of that happening in every missing persons case are slim to none, in my opinion. And why wouldn't she contact her mother or her best friend just to say, hey, don't worry, we're both okay? Why wouldn't she contact her daughter? Why wouldn't she contact the daughter that she'd spent the last several years being devoted to? I often wonder why people wait so long to file a missing persons report. And in doing my research into these cases, I found that the authorities won't investigate if there is no foul play suspected. So a lot of times when families are trying to file the report, they are met with resistance from police, ultimately stating that adults are allowed to leave and not tell anyone where they are going. But what about Evan? Evan was a minor. He was 15 years old. Is he allowed to just disappear and not tell anybody where he's going? Other sources I found state that Susie's family just really weren't too concerned at first, that Susie was a private person. They didn't want to cause an uproar by calling the police if everything was fine. They had their reasons for not filing. When the sheriffs arrive, now remember this is 2 months after Susie and Evan were last heard from, they get some hope because when they pull into the driveway, Susie's car is there. When Jerry answers the door, it's pretty clear that he has been doing some extensive cleaning by the odor that was permeating out from behind him. When authorities asked Jerry if Susie and Evan were home, that's where things start getting weird. Because Jerry tells investigators that they no longer live there. Jerry stated that Susie had been cheating on him and that she left Jerry for another man and took Evan with her. Jerry stated that they got into an unknown black truck with an unknown man on Memorial Day, then the next day returned to take a couple pieces of furniture, a few items of personal belongings, and that was the last time Jerry seen them. Jerry was very pushy about the fact that the last time he seen them, they were very much alive. Why would she not take her car if she was leaving him? Why would she not tell her daughter where she was going? I get it, if she was leaving and in the hurry of everything, forgot to text Holly, but she was her best friend. After Susie got settled, why wouldn't she call her best friend and tell her what was going on? And if Susie did return the day after to take furniture and personal belongings, why wouldn't she take her car with her? At first, authorities had no reason to not believe Jerry's story that Susie had moved out and moved on. That was until Holly contacted investigators and stated, I don't believe that for 1 second. When trying to get more information from Holly, authorities learned that in January of 2016, so a year and a few months prior to their disappearance, Susie had discovered some haunting and disturbing things about the man that she'd been married and living with for the last 2 years. Susie had texted Holly to say that she was going to send her some emails because Jerry would read her text messages. In one of the emails, Susie went on to tell Holly that she thought Jerry was a gay male escort. Jerry had started picking up extra shifts, always working these long hours. And at first, Susie didn't think anything of it, other than he wanted to make sure to provide for the three of them. Until one day, when she needed Jerry for something and Jerry was supposed to be at work for one of these shifts, Susie couldn't get him on his cell phone. So she called up his job and spoke to Jerry's boss. And Jerry's boss says, no, he's not here. He's not supposed to be working today. That's when Susie started digging into Jerry's computer at home. Susie found him on several escort websites soliciting sex for money with men. Susie was able to recognize Jerry from his tattoos in the photos. Susie also sent screenshots of messages to and from Jerry with other men to Holly. Later, Susie had told Holly to forget about this stuff in the emails because her and Jerry had talked and worked everything out. When investigators found this information out about the emails from Holly, that's when they decided to serve search warrants on the property. When the sheriff's department arrived to serve the search warrants, they stated that Jerry was still doing some cleaning 2 days in a row. He had ripped up carpet. He had repainted all of the walls. He was doing some extensive remodeling in this house. Officials reported that Jerry had told them Susie had taken some spray paint and painted vulgarities all over the walls on the inside of the house, and that was the reason why he had to repaint them. The rest of the renovations were for him to be able to sell the place. Out in the backyard, there was a 55-gallon drum being used as a burn barrel, and another spot off to the right of that where it looked to investigators would also be a burn pile. When they dug through the pile, they found some mattress springs and what looked to be ashes from some furniture. When authorities searched through the burn barrel, they found some interesting materials inside, but after forensic testing, it turned out to be a dead end. Investigators learned that Jerry had a surveillance system, and they asked Jerry to look at the cameras that he had on the property to see the last known footage of Susie and Evan getting into this truck as he claimed. But Jerry told authorities that he had recently upgraded his surveillance system and no longer had the footage or equipment it was recorded on. Jerry did offer up proof to his story that Susie and Evan left on their own free will by providing authorities with a receipt from a doctor's appointment Evan had scheduled for after Memorial Day. When authorities followed up on that receipt, it turned out that the bill was for a no-show, that Evan in fact did not show up to that appointment. Authorities go talk to all of Jerry and Susie's neighbors, and several neighbors reported that there were several fires burning in the backyard in the weeks after Memorial Day. They reported stating that they saw him taking all of Susie and Evan's stuff out of his house, and that for 2 to 3 days there was like a thick fog hanging over the neighborhood. Like 5 houses down could smell the smoke. They couldn't go outside their house. They could just smell all this burning plastic. Authorities also brought out cadaver dogs to do searches of the property. Although the dogs did alert in a couple of places, investigators, they found nothing to help them further along their investigation. The reports say when they went through the house with the substance luminol, which detects the presence of blood and glows under ultraviolet light, they found what looked to be a massive crime scene. There were blood splatters all over the walls and on the floor in the foyer area near the front door. They found what appeared to be a blood streak running through the kitchen and on the door frame going out the back door, as if someone or something had been dragged through there, then propped up so the door could be opened. Authorities sent off samples of the blood to be analyzed in a forensic lab, and it was ultimately discovered the blood found was not able to produce a DNA profile as it had been contaminated by the cleaning products. There are definitely a lot of questions still left to be answered in this case. Starting with, where is Susie and Evan? Did they run away? Did they even get into a truck and drive off, as Jerry stated? Why hasn't she contacted her mother or her daughter? Several theories have been tossed into the air, but Susie's family only believes one. They believe that no matter what happened to them, they have passed on. Susie's sister-in-law stated Susie would never leave her daughter. One theory the authorities are leaning toward is that Jerry killed Susan and had to kill Evan to cover up Susan's murder. And with all the evidence they found in that house, the stories that Jerry told, it does seem as if he did have something to do with it. However, without more information, DNA, or bodies, they are at a standstill. They cannot prosecute Jerry, so no formal charges were ever filed against him. Is this justice? I can see from the point of view of the family how devastating it is. There is all this evidence, and none of it can stand up in court. No DNA, no surveillance, just 2 people missing, gone into the night, never seen or heard from again. Susan and Evan have been featured in the Paramount docuseries Never Seen Again, and still the family begs for your assistance. If you know anything about Jerry Osborne or the whereabouts of Susan Osborne and her son Evan Chartrand, you are urged to contact the Elmore County Sheriff's Department at 334-567-5546. So guys, what do you think about this case? What do you think happened to Susan and Evan? Do you think Jerry killed them, then burned their bodies in the backyard? Are they alive? Did they run away? I speculate that Jerry did in fact kill Susie and Evan. I think someone out there has heard this story from Jerry and is afraid of coming forward. So many times we see it happen. People know information. They do not tell what they know in fear of consequences it might have on them. But if you are listening and you have any information regarding this case, please contact the proper authorities. Let's help Susie and Evan's family get closer to finding them and bringing them home. The family is aware that it will probably be bodies, but feel that they deserve a proper burial. Leave your comments below and tell me what you think happened in this case. That is going to wrap up this week's podcast on Susan Osborne and her son Evan Chartrand. It has been 6 years, and investigators are no closer to having all the answers. Join me next week as I ramble on about the case of Jared Johnston. And remember, friends, it is up to you to like, share, and subscribe. Help me bring more attention to these cases so these families can be that much closer to getting some answers. Thanks for listening, and as always, ramble on.